Greetings, friends. I want to make a video today in response to um, a request that Andrew from Japan, we all know him as Mr. Modiyoshi, regarding a recent video that Jay had put up about the loss of his dog. And it reminded me that several of us have experienced losses of differing degrees over the past several months. You'll recall that my brother-in-law passed suddenly during the Christmas holidays while on business in Mexico. And I recall Scott from Aristocob.com letting us know that his father-in-law had passed. And I know we all recall Pipe Pappy and the struggles that he's had, not only with his health, but his wife's health and his wife's sister. I recall watching a video recently of Diesel Wrench 4. Shane is going through a tough time. So I just want to speak about stress in very general terms. If you imagine your life as a pond or a lake that's very calm, so calm that you can see anything surrounding it reflected in the calmness of the water. The clouds in the blue sky above, the trees that line the banks. And then take a pebble and throw it into the center of that pond. And where the pebble strikes the water, there's an immediate disruption. Bloop. And from that initial disruption, you've got waves that flow out toward the bank. Now, that pebble represents a small stress in our lives. Maybe it's getting stuck in snowy winter traffic for several hours in Atlanta. Or maybe it represents not making it to the bank on time to get a deposit slip in. Or maybe it represents the breakup of a relationship, or the loss of a loved one, or the loss of a beloved pet. So if our stresses only came as small pebbles, then we may be able to handle them quite easily. But take a boulder, a huge boulder, and throw it up into the air and let it disrupt your calm and serene pond. And that may represent a divorce, or an eviction, or the loss of a loved one, or again, a beloved pet. And from that initial disruption, the waves emanate out from the center, and those represent the days that follow the initial stress. You have good days and bad days, good days and bad days. And if every incident were an isolated incident, those ripples would reach the banks and they would dissipate, but they don't. The surrounding bank or the surrounding shoreline is the world we live in. We don't live an isolated life. We have companions that travel on this journey with us. Family, friends, loved ones, pets. And so when those good days and bad days from that stress reach the bank, they start to come back to us. And those are the stresses that affect those around us, those close people around us, their good days and bad days. And so there's this constant going back and forth of the ripples from the stresses in our lives. Now imagine if you took a handful of rocks, from small pebble size to large boulders, and threw them all up in the air at the same time. They would not all come crashing down at once. There'd be smaller ones hitting and larger ones hitting, sometimes in the same day, sometimes throughout a week, a month, throughout the year, or over the course of several years. And all those disruptions in your calm and serene pond have the same ripple effect that the small or the large stress has. And that's what we're all dealing with. The ripples coming back from the people that we love are experiencing the same phenomena. And it amazes me, given that metaphor for life and the stress that we deal with every day, that more people don't flip out and do crazy stuff. There's a lot of stress and tension that we experience from the world, and then narrow it down to within our countries, and narrow that down to within our cities, and then narrow it down to within our families. So how do we cope? What do we do? How do we get by with so much going on in our lives, so much disruption? And to me, that's where a community like the YouTube Pipe community comes into play. I want to tell you a story about a farmer. One day, or one evening, he's watching the evening news, and the weatherman is reporting about a large storm that's approaching. And it's a rather large storm, and it's going to last for several days. And he sort of smiles to himself inwardly, and he knows that he's just that afternoon completed putting in his crop. So he goes to bed that night secure in the feeling that he's prepared, that he's ready for the storm to come. So he wakes up early the next morning, and he's having his morning coffee, and he looks out the window, and he can see off on the horizon across his field on a ridge his neighbor in a tractor going back and forth across his field. And he realizes at that moment that his neighbor didn't get his crop in on time. And sure enough, the rain comes, light at first, and as the morning progresses, it gets heavier. And as he watches his neighbor, he notices that the tractor is going slower, slower, and slower, until finally it stops. There's no movement at all. So he puts on his hat and his coat and his boots, and he trudges across his field and into the neighbor's field. And as he approaches the tractor, he can see that it's stuck up to the rear axle of the big tires. And he looks at his neighbor and he says, man, you're really stuck. And the neighbor shakes his head in acknowledgement. He goes, yeah, this is a mess. And the farmer looks at him and he says, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go get my tractor. And if I can't pull you out, I'll get down in there and sit in it with you. And that, my friends, is a true friend. That's what we call a mud sitter. He knows he can't help his friend. There's nothing he can do to change the circumstances, but he's not going to abandon his friend in his time of need. And I think that's what the YouTube Pipe community represents. It's a virtual group of mud sitters. It's not how much tobacco we give to one another, and it's not, the VRs to the contests, which are all great and fun, and I love those aspects of this. But I've also witnessed personally, through my own experience and through others, the kind of camaraderie and mud sitting that we provide for one another. What draws us to the YouTube Pipe community? It might have been pipes initially, but what keeps us here is the friendship. It's the reaching out, and it's the being a part of something greater than ourselves, something I've said in previous videos of my own. And so, therefore, regardless of what stress or struggle or trouble you may be experiencing, we're here, and we will be here throughout the trouble and when the trouble is over, or if it continues on. And I think that's one of the blessings that we all receive by being a part of this wonderful, loving, caring, giving YouTube Pipe community. So, Andrew, that's my response to your request. And I want to thank you all for taking the time to hear me out. It's one of my longer videos. I see them up over 10.5 minutes. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thanks for listening. Until we meet again, happy trails.